and the moral crisis of solitary confinement, discussing the film Torture in Our Name, a moral call to end solitary confinement. We're so grateful tonight that this convening is jointly co-hosted by the National Religious Campaign Against Torture and the Multifaith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration. I want to share a bit of information about Multifaith EMI, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Reverend Ron Stief, to give a bit more information about NRCAT. The Multifaith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration was founded 5 years ago, and it leverages the power of U.S. faith leaders and faith communities to emphatically demand and act for an end to mass incarceration at both the national and local levels through narrative advancement, congregational engagement, and public policy advocacy and education. We engage congregations across the length and breadth of this country and their leaders to educate their communities and move them towards actions, just actions that end this moral scar of mass incarceration, and in a real sense, build a beloved community. This work happens through trainings, narrative direct action, and also public works of justice, not only on the local level, but also on Capitol Hill. This work is not done in a silo, but it's done in partnership with wonderful partners, such as those from NRCAT. And I want to turn the conversation over to my colleague, Reverend Ron, to talk a bit more about NRCAT and the film that has been produced, which we'll discuss this evening. Reverend Ron?
Yeah, thanks, Reverend Crawford, and thanks everybody for being here. The National Religious Campaign Against Torture, and my name's here, but I'll say it anyway. It's Reverend Ron Stief, and I'm the executive director of NRCAT. We were founded almost 20 years ago, and for those of you who were able to see the film, I hope you all did. You can clearly see that torture in any context is immoral, and solitary confinement is definitely torture, as Reverend Crawford talked about, the sin, really, I'll call it that, of what we do to people with mass incarceration. The sin within the sin is what happens to people in the hidden solitary confinement cells of our prison system. We are interfaith. We have about 300 national organizations. They span religious, local, and national groups. We mobilize the faith community to take action to end torture. And in this case, we are trying to work with a lot of people across the country right now, because we have a lot of legislative momentum. We work on legislation. We have a lot of momentum with people exposing what's happening inside their prisons. We look at solitary confinement as an issue that impacts our federal prison system, where about 10% of the people are in solitary, our state systems, where about the other 90% are. And we also work to end solitary confinement in immigrant detention centers. We do rapid response work. We do public policy work. And for the interfaith community, you know, I think we have different touchstones. Many of us are here because we believe that all humans are created in the image of God. Some of us are here because we just have a general sense of the need to respect and preserve human dignity and the common good. Whatever it is, we have found in our work that in the faith community, there is broad agreement across all the faiths, and I literally mean all the faiths, that torture is always wrong without exception. That's kind of NRCAT's tagline. There's never a good reason for one human being to torture another human being, not for national security, not for personal safety, not for expressing power. Torture is a moral issue and is never permissible. So that's the touchstone that we use in our work as a national coalition. We're based in Washington, D.C. We're extremely proud to be partnering with the Multifaith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration, one of the many organizations we work with. And just really thank you for being here. And I think we're going to have a good conversation tonight.
Thank you so much, Ron. And we want to thank everyone who's tuning in from across the country, from DC, New York, Birmingham, Atlanta. All of you are critical in this work of ending solitary confinement. We're joined tonight with several other colleagues from NRCAT and the Multifaith Initiative who will be speaking later on in the program. Those include Mr. Johnny Perez, who is the director of U.S. prison programs at NRCAT, and also serves on the member of the National Board of the Initiative to End Mass Incarceration. We also have Ms. Nicole Wiesen, who serves as the Georgia Regional Coordinator for the Multifaith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration. And we've gathered this evening because we really are at a crucial and critical moment as it relates to the movement to end solitary confinement. We'll hear a bit more about the legislation on the federal level that's been introduced, that's gaining traction, more organizational sponsors, as well as supporters in the Senate. But this is a critical moment for us to gather together to hear informed perspectives on solitary confinement, to see firsthand the ways in which this affects all of us, not just a select few of us, that we're all interconnected in many ways. Dr. King says we're all tied in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied together in a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects all indirectly. And so we cannot truly call ourselves free as long as we have sisters and brothers who are languishing in solitary confinement to this day. And so we're gathering together to find out how we can all be involved in this advocacy moment to end solitary confinement. I want to now turn to my colleague, Johnny Perez, who will share more about the film Torture in Our Name and how this project came about as it's been led by NRCAT.
Thank you for that, Reverend Crawford. Thank you for everyone. Thank you, Ron, for giving that background on NRCAT. And thank you for everybody for joining us this afternoon. You know, for some of you, maybe a little bit earlier than others, and hopefully you were able to watch the film. So Torture in Our Name, you know, it came from, we worked with filmmaker Matthew Gossage to really showcase the tenacity and leadership of faith leaders, solitary survivors, and organizers on the ground across 3 different states, particularly Louisiana, New Jersey, and New York. The success in these legislative campaigns, we really wanted to really capture what was happening there to share with others in terms of like the power of the faith community and solitary survivors when they come together, the actual change that can happen. So the film follows some of the journey of the folks in New Jersey. You know, I'll say folks that New Jersey was a state that previously Governor Christie had vetoed the bill, and that campaign kept this morale, kept the momentum, kept the pressure, and eventually, you know, they were successful. And now we can talk about what the campaign is today a little bit after the film. Same thing in New York. That was a 9-year campaign, which is where I'm from New York. It was a 9-year campaign. It probably would have finished a little bit faster if there was just more support early on. And then the last one is Louisiana. You know, in the South, you know, some may say that if we can change things in the South, we can change it anywhere. You know, and Louisiana has some of the most atrocious prisons in the country, at least that I've seen in my short career of 10 years of doing this work. So we're hoping that the film, you know, not only inspires people to want to do something, anything, right, but also does give people a concrete, tangible example of what happens when faith leaders and those most impacted by the issues that we work on unite and I guess I really want to say join forces and reap the benefits of the synergy that comes from such a powerful collaboration. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. And as you watch it, or if you saw it already and some questions came up, please drop them in the chat. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. And if not, we can always follow up. We're just going to really just scratch the surface in this conversation. So thanks again, and give me 2 seconds and I'll share my screen.
We can use our common sense to understand and know that this is not right, that this is not justice.
It sounds simplistic, but it is mental and sometimes physical torture.
I had dreams as a young person, and they weren't to be an incarcerated person. They weren't dreams of being in solitary confinement. They weren't dreams of self-harm.
The world that we live in is not evil. However, there are evil things that happen in this world.
You will have pushback, must see the world as it is, and then start to bend it toward the way it should be.
We make mistakes, but we are not those mistakes, and we should not live out the rest of our lives in that mistake. People should not die because they made a mistake. So many people have died in solitary confinement.
Before I got involved, I had no idea what was going on in our prisons and jails. No matter how small you think your effort is, it matters. It matters to the person who spends 23 to 24 hours a day alone in a cell.
We are created in God's image, and that comes with obligations, which completely flies in the face of any possible justification one could ever have for torture.
We have to walk into that space and be honest and be transparent and give them the facts because they don't know.
They got to hear it directly from us. They finally realized that we were the experts.
Let's put a stop to it.
Well, it happens everywhere. If there's a prison, it happens.
And he's absolutely right. If there's a prison, it happens. One shape, way, or form, people are held inside of these spaces, and sometimes perpetually. I want to pull back a little bit and go into some of the state work. But before I move on to the state work, I want to mention that since this film was made, there's been a groundbreaking report led by our national partners, Unlock the Box, and also the national watchdog group, Solitary Watch. And that torture, I believe it's called Calculating Torture, actually quantified the number of people held inside of these spaces to 122,000 people. So in the film, it says 80,000 people, but that is currently inaccurate, and the number is much higher than that at 122. And I would argue that is even much higher than that, since many correctional departments have been known to change names, to either reframe it, just outright lie and say that they don't have it when in fact that they do. With that being said, I want to pull back now and just go to share some of our state work. Let me see. I'm gonna actually share my screen here. And don't worry about taking notes or anything like that. I'm not going to be able to get through all the slides, but I will share some highlights, and you will receive the copies to these slides. So no worries. But there's some key points that I want to make in our conversation here. And I say that having spoken to countless incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals around the country, I can say with unwavering certainty that our current system, as it stands, operates under this misguided notion that relentless punishment will correct behavior. However, it fails to acknowledge that the very environment it creates often exasperates and perpetuates the same behaviors it seeks to regulate. So here it is, we are trying to hold people accountable by using solitary confinement, and that in itself exasperates the same types of behaviors that the behavior hopes to regulate. 6 by 9 foot cells, no direct sunlight, drab colors, no daylight in some cells. Some cells don't even have windows. And for the purposes of just understanding this issue, right? The definition of solitary is the practice of just isolating people from I won't say human contact for 22 to 24 hours a day. And that is my definition. However, we will give you the actual definition that we've used in some of our legislation, which I should have used for this presentation, only because, you know, the problem here is the conditions and not necessarily how it's called per se. So it harms, of course, incarcerated people in ways that we can probably think about. Of course, you know, mentally, emotionally, physically, people lose weight. There's many people who, you know, their mental health are exasperated as a result. I myself spent 3 years in solitary confinement for cannabis consumption. And I say that today at a time in our age where cannabis consumption is being legalized around the country, right? There's also harms in the community, right? Released people who've been separated from their families for years, you know, are at a higher likelihood of recidivism, death, and illness. Family members struggle to reconnect with their loved ones. I had a gentleman in Ohio who said, "Johnny, how do I learn to live with a family who has learned to live without me for so many years? I need help," right? Family separation, the intentional weakening of family ties. And this is actually Melania Brown, sister of Leilene Polanco, a trans woman who died while being held in solitary in New York, Rikers Island. You know, and this is not just a one-sided issue. Solitary is so insidious that it also affects correctional officers who are working on these units, right? These officers report high stress levels, burnout and fatigue, right? Increased irritability, mental health consequences, right? Increased rates of suicide. And these are the folks who we literally entrusting to also watch our loved ones and keep care, custody, and control our loved ones. So on that platform, right, on that soil, right, what has the work actually looked like? And I'm here to say with really great news that we have an incredible amount of momentum. And just to give you some numbers here, right, in 2020, 26 states introduced 63 pieces of legislation to limit solitary confinement. 6 states, particularly Florida, Louisiana, Nebraska, New Jersey, Washington, Virginia, passed legislation to abolish solitary for young people and for pregnant people, because yes, we do live in a country that shackles women while they're giving birth. It still holds them in solitary during their incarceration. Look up Pamela Wynn out of Georgia, who shared a lot of her journey on our federal bill. In the last 5 years, we've seen 45 pieces of legislation that have been passed, specifically around mental health exclusions, which have led the way. New Jersey, Connecticut, New York are the biggest successes in the past 5 years, according to the work. They passed progressive legislation in their respective states. New Jersey limited solitary to 15 days. Connecticut limited solitary to 20 days. New York limited solitary to just 15 days. These are states where people were held in solitary for 10, 15 years, 5 years. New York alone had 5,200 people locked in solitary before the HALT bill passed. Today, they have a little bit over 200 people, and the struggle still continues at the city level in New York. In New Jersey, the ombudsman office, because now they have oversight. A lot of the problems happens because there's oversight. A lot of the bills include oversight to ensure that there's proper implementation and that the department is implementing the bills in the spirit of the law. And New Jersey has been in violation of it. And after it passed in 2019, COVID hit. So that gave implementation even just another hurdle in order to be implemented properly and effectively. So that's the current fight there. And in Connecticut, we were successful enough to, during the course of the campaign, to actually close a facility. And what we learned there is that there are so many facilities that are 100% completely dedicated to solitary confinement, is that when we end solitary, we also close prisons. Southport Correctional Facility is another example of being able to end solitary confinement in a state that has dedicated complete buildings to the torture of solitary, and now have had to close as a result of the work of the people on the ground, the family members, the loved ones, and yes, faith leaders who are uniquely positioned to hold legislators morally accountable to the values that they say they stand for on the campaign trail, which brings us to our federal work, which Ron is going to talk about. We hope that you can use the film as a number of things, and we can talk about how to use it a little bit more later, but at the very least, to start conversations where these conversations are not happening, to educate those around you, right, who don't know that these atrocities are happening, right? And of course, to hold our legislators accountable and say, well, wait a minute, I don't want this to happen on my watch. And if you're a faith leader and you're thinking about ways to engage, I look at solitary as a person who spent 3 years in solitary and has worked on the issue for 10 years, that there are so many oppressive policies completely tied to solitary confinement that when we eradicate and eliminate solitary confinement, we really do cripple the beast of mass incarceration. Take forced labor, for example. In prison, you're forced to work. If you don't work, you're sent to solitary. So the answer is accountability and not punishment, of course, and of course to create an environment where people are able to flourish and come back, since we know most people are coming back into our society. With that being said, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Reverend Ron Stief, to talk a little bit about our federal work and, of course, the importance and what does more examples of faith engagement, at the state level, at the federal level, and how faith leaders have really just showed up in ways in which I just continue to be proud about, especially at the end of such an exciting year. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. And I think it's important for people to understand how you get what we're trying to change here. A system that won't report what it's doing, won't tell you how many people are in solitary confinement, won't tell you how many people have died, won't tell you how their definitions fit how they're actually treating the people inside. while we're trying to end mass incarceration, which we are all struggling to do, we're all fighting to do, that's the righteous cause. We have to think about the people that are already in prison, still in prison, and especially the people on the back end where you can have one day we think there might be 60 to 80,000. Then we start adding up numbers from the Bureau of Justice Statistics and other places, and we find out that it's really 122,000 people. They want to stay hidden inside our prisons. You all know this, those of you who are activists. They want this information to be kept from the public. They don't want anybody to see things like this film where people are actually taking social change into their own hands. Our federal bill, I often think that if we could, if it's really about accountability. So with our federal bill, which has been sponsored, just actually was introduced yesterday on the Senate side by Senators Warren, Sanders, Pete Welch, joining Ed Markey, who was the lead, Senator Ed Markey, who was the lead. And there's a companion bill in the House with Representative Cori Bush and over 20 members of Congress. What they are saying in this new federal legislation is we need to ban solitary confinement in all federal facilities. And of course, you need to make limited exceptions for medical quarantine, for sleep, emergency de-escalation, if there's a lockdown. But we've even met with experts who said even after 9/11, the lockdowns, you know, when there was this huge security concern about what was even happening, the lockdowns didn't need to be more than 4 or 5 hours. Protecting people who are vulnerable, Johnny mentioned, LGBTQ plus individuals, elderly individuals, pregnant people. Our bill mandates reporting because we don't have what kind of reporting is happening on self-harm and suicide in the facilities. We need to know these things so that we can be effective change agents. We need to know what are the demographic breakdowns of what's happening inside the prisons and the solitary confinement cells. Community monitoring is a big part of our state work. And in fact, a few of the people that you saw in the film are now representing their communities on community monitoring bodies where states have passed legislation to ban solitary. Giving people a private right of action. The state of California, really every state, is full of people who are thrown into solitary confinement, sometimes without even being told why, and have no recourse. These are the kind of things where if we can change these pieces, or if, let me just put it another way, if we can get the conversation started about why these pieces of information are necessary for the general public and for everybody to understand how we can reduce solitary confinement and torture inside our prisons, but more importantly, how we're treating people inside our prisons. If we can start to establish some of these standards, what we're hoping is that the prison system will listen to what we're saying is that you need to look at your whole way of operating, how you're doing things. We need to stop just locking people up and placing them in torture cells without ever telling anybody the harm that that's causing, not just to the people that are inside in the prisons, but also to the staff who have to work in these horrible zones within the prisons. So our federal legislation is, I think, a bellwether really of where we are in the community. Interestingly, the staff of Senator Markey and other Senate staff read an article that was in Teen Vogue that we got placed. We've had the Washington Post editorializing against solitary, the New York Times editorializing, the Orange County Register, a conservative paper, calling on Governor Newsom to sign our bill, which he vetoed when it passed in California. There are the news media has kind of taken this on as an issue. The faith community, as you've seen, has taken this on as an issue. The survivors are out taking this on as an issue. And that, I guess the last thing I'll say about our work is that what we're trying to do is turn the tables on who is considered to be an expert on prisons. We have survivors who've been there. And there's a couple poignant moments in the film where they say, "You can't tell me that you don't have solitary confinement in our prisons in New Jersey, Governor Christie, because I was sitting in a solitary confinement cell when you came out and made that statement when you vetoed the bill. You can't say that because I was there. I know they're solitary inside these." The Federal Bureau of Prisons, until just a few years ago, actually, in a Senate hearing that I was at, they made the statement that they do not have solitary confinement. Right after that, the head of the Bureau of Prisons, who was kind of on the witness stand, couldn't even tell you how big a solitary confinement cell was. They have locked people away and hidden them in torture chambers in our prisons. So it's about shining light, and this is the season of shining light for so many of us who are getting ready to celebrate Hanukkah. For Christmas, we just had Diwali a month ago, the indigenous populations. This is the season of light, and that's what our work is about, is shedding light on the darkness and translating that into change in the policy arena. We're all good at different parts of it. We need each other to take on the different parts, whether it's how somebody gets sentenced and gets put in, or how somebody gets put in solitary confinement, and then how we eventually start to change over the whole system so that we don't have these horrible high numbers of people that are just wasting away inside our prison system. So I'll turn it back over to Reverend Devon, I think, and we'll probably at some point here get to another one of the videos that NRCAT uses for education. We have educational resources, Humans Out of Solitary, the film that you just saw. We have a lot of things that we can resource you in this work, specific not just to solitary confinement, but just to the voice of survivors and the faith community out there trying to make a difference.
Yeah, thank you so much, Reverend Ron. And this work that you're doing and that Johnny has helped to lead is critical. And this is why Multifaith EMI has emphatically, ardently joined you in this work and the work of so many other initiatives that you're doing. For we recognize that ending solitary confinement is really at the heart of crippling the moral pandemic of mass incarceration, as Johnny mentioned earlier. To be sure, all of us who are on this call recognize that we are living in challenging times. When you look at the state of our criminal legal system and the number of people that are subjected to isolated confinement, we are living in challenging times. In the words of the former First Lady of the U.S., Eleanor Roosevelt, these are no ordinary times. And Multifaith EMI is concerned about ending solitary confinement because this practice, which really represents the cultural production of evil, we've heard in the film that the world itself is not evil, but there are evil things in this world. And I think it's something for us as people of faith to name what this practice is, not really it being an evil practice. It is that which diminishes the human personality. Solitary separates us from each other, and it allows us to place a blind eye towards the egregious way in which we treat people. The ways in which we reduce people to their worst moments is egregious. Solitary confinement fractures our beloved community, or what we would want to create as a beloved community, and inhibits us from being our best selves in this country. It isolates, it controls, it segregates our sisters and brothers for not only weeks, but months and years, depriving folks from basic light and human contact, and in a real sense, from the hope of living to see another day. And it goes against everything that we stand for as faith communities, as those who believe in redemption and believe in love and peace and just relationship with another. And so we've come together because we believe that in order to strike a crippling blow to this form of evil in the world, we have to work together. That we're stronger when we come together as organizations, as people of faith, as neighbors in this world, from multiple faith traditions. We must stand together not only as spiritual guides, but as those who are agents of change, as those who stand and bear witness, like Bayard Rustin, who called us angelic troublemakers. We are the ones who are called to make things unworkable when the least of these, when the oppressed are looked over and they are confined in practices such as isolated confinement. And so we recognize in this moment that our silence truly is betrayal, that we cannot remain silent. We cannot remain idle as brothers and sisters are languishing in isolation. But we must meet this moment with prophetic moral witness, speaking those things that are not as though they are, speaking of a new way of being, a new way of relating to each other, a new way of engaging outside of this immoral practice of solitary confinement. And it takes all of us from our various traditions, which is why we've come together for such a time as this. And so I want to, again, offer my colleague Johnny Perez an opportunity to share more about the work of Humans Out of Solitary, which is a series which allows us to see firsthand the impact and effect of solitary confinement on our brothers and sisters. And we'll hear more from Nicole Wiesen, the Georgia Regional Coordinator of the Multifaith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration, about her lived experience navigating the carceral state.
Thank you for that, Reverend Crawford. So one of the, part of the, let me see, let's part of this. Here we go. The part of this fight is to really, like Reverend Stief said, like kind of shed light on the darkness that is happens inside of prisons. And who better to do that than people who've actually experienced it? So about 2 years ago, I started to sit down and just talk to other survivors. I was like, I know so many survivors around the country. And I know my own experience, but I was curious about the experience of others, and so to not only inform my work, but to truly understand the issue that I'm fighting against. And the result of that has been 30 short interviews with 30 solitary survivors that are geographically, dispersed all over the country with different experiences from just a few weeks to years, if not decades, for some who experience solitary confinement. And we created a series out of it with the hopes that people would use the series as an opportunity to also continue to catalyze conversations. So the catalyze conversations around solitary, to move hearts and minds, to maybe even refer to in a sermon, to motivate folks, but more importantly, just to engage in organizing work and spread awareness about this issue as told by the people who were actually there and experienced it themselves firsthand. And I'll tell you, as the interviewer for about 22 of these interviews, most of them went really long, 5-6 hours. There were tears, there were hugs. And, I continue to be amazed by the leadership of the survivors who are engaged in this work and those who are not, because not everybody in the series is engaged in campaign work. And the common denominator is they all experience solitary confinement. So the one that we want to share today, and out of 30 of them, you can use them to create curriculums. There's a number of ways that you can use them. They're really short. And NRCAT has been using them for organizing purposes and to raise awareness. So we've been managed to get, for example, Donna Hilton, who's also a colleague of ours on the EMI a board of directors. She was actually the first film, and we were able to also support an op-ed that she drafted to have it posted on USA Today, along with her Humans Out of Solitary video. The same for some others. Joseph De La Luz, his video ended up on John Oliver Tonight, where he actually went in true John Oliver style, and how he talks about and discusses the issue of solitary confinement. So we've been trying to not only place these interviews in popular media, national media, local media, but even just in people's living rooms when they can look at a 3-minute video and let it catalyze a conversation about how we can engage in this work. Natasha White is a formerly incarcerated survivor of solitary confinement and a New York native. She's a previous leader in the Close Rikers campaign, and also the Halt in the Close Rikers campaign and the Halt Solitary Confinement campaign, which was successful for passing and ending solitary in New York. And she recently relocated to Virginia, where she now continues her fight there, leading both in Virginia and nearby in Maryland. Her video is only about 3 minutes long. So we want to make sure that we want to share it during this conversation here. Give me 2 seconds to bring it up. Thanks, y'all.
As a society, we value community, public safety, and even second chances. Yet, across the United States, there are countless people who are being subjected to the torture of solitary confinement. And although many have not survived such dehumanizing conditions, for those who do, they have lived long enough to tell their truth, share their journeys of resilience, and more importantly, to challenge our moral compass. Here's what they had to say.
I am the coordinator for the Virginia Coalition on Solitary Confinement. Our bill is bipartisan. We are trying to pass a bill which will mirror the HALT bill, with limiting solitary confinement to 15 days within a 60-day time span. So far, I have been trying to build the members of the coalition with bringing in community members and faith-based leaders, directly impacted people, and the loved ones of incarcerated people. We currently were on an 8-week tour throughout the state, speaking with Republican delegates. The state is very different from what I'm accustomed to because I'm a New York native. So it's been kind of hard, but I'm diligent and I'm passionate about this. This is personal for me. I myself was in solitary confinement for 4 years while incarcerated in a New York State prison. When you break a spirit, this is not like healing a broken leg. A broken leg heals itself. You break a spirit, that person has become like an infant. It will depend on you for everything because the person does not understand how to function like as if they were, among other people anymore. Some people never come back from that. I also suffer a lot from my time in solitary confinement. I'm extremely needy emotionally, but space-wise, I want company, but I don't want them once they get here. I'm used to being alone, and I function better alone. I have problems with expressing my feelings when I'm irritable, and I'm easily agitated. So, yeah, it's been hard. However, if I would have not gone through prison as an adult, solitary confinement, a failed marriage, domestic abuse, I wouldn't be able to save anybody. You can do all the talking you want from books, but a person in your face that has survived the type of traumas that I've survived gives you hope that it can be done because I did it. So, like I said, this is my mission. If you don't believe it, try locking yourself in the bathroom for a whole day. For a whole day. You have water, you have everything you need there. Toilet, water. Try it and see how it feels. Treat people how you want to be treated. I don't care who they are. You should be good to everyone. Not just people that are free, not just people that you think didn't make a mistake. To everyone. That is how humankind survives. You have to be thoughtful and caring, and you will see that this is wrong. That's it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Natasha. I love her. She's so amazing, and she's so dedicated to the work. I mean, she's on calls at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, bailing people out. She's just an amazing human being. Every time I see it, it just like really humbles me. I want to go ahead and create space and pass it to my colleague, Nicole Wiesen, who's leading work in Georgia and also part of our EMI National Network. Thank you so much, Nicole. Thanks.
Thank you for having me here. I do really appreciate it. As a previously incarcerated woman and working in this space and seeing the effects of how solitary confinement not just affected the women that I was housed with in 3 of the women's prisons here in Georgia, but my own experience of it when you leave to, there are other ways to go into solitary confinement, and not just for some work that happened while you were, not being a quote model inmate, but if you leave to go out to handle a charge in another county or whatever the case may be, you come back into solitary confinement. Sometimes when you go and you enter into that jail within that county, you're in solitary confinement even within that jail, because they don't want the state prisoners to interact with the county inmates. So it's a really a weird kind of dynamic that happens. So again, you're definitely deprived of all things that you need. You're being called so many different names. You know, the women are catcalling you, and who the hell do you think you are? And why are you so special? And why are you alone? So I do resonate with what Natasha said in saying that, yes, while you want company, you actually want to be alone. And then you go into solitary confinement again when you leave prison and you've actually been released. And while they say they do that for your safety, it's actually a way of, again, controlling you one last time before you leave, of remember where you were, remember where you are, you can come back to this. So it still crushes the spirit of the person, even though they know they're leaving within that 24-hour window of time. You're still sitting in, where am I going? What am I doing? Why are these people yelling at me? Why am I still being treated this way? Sometimes you get fed, sometimes you don't get fed. You know, I wasn't given a shower. I couldn't do some of the things that I needed to do to get ready to leave. And then the next morning, I'm being yelled at by officers. You know, the deputy director of security is yelling at me, and what are you doing here, Wiesen? And, you know, and just everything. So again, I'm compounded with more PTSD and more issues of, God, now I got to bring this home. How am I going to handle this? How am I going to now react, even though I just spent 23 hours, again, in a cell with no windows, hearing all of the screaming and traumas and things that are going on, but I'm being released. So even if you spend one day in solitary versus 15 years, 10 years, or weeks, it's a crushing experience that does need to end. And so I'm here to back my NRCAT brothers and sisters in this fight to make sure that we do end it in whatever form possible. Thank you.
So I believe we're going to hasten to question and answer at this time. So if anyone has questions, thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing. And of course to Johnny and to Ron. We want to open up the conversation to everyone who's in the virtual space. So you can share your questions via chat. We have about 12 minutes until we are at time. But as you're populating questions in the chat, I'll just offer a few just to get us started. So this question really gets to the heart of, you know, how can people become engaged with their faith communities in this movement to end solitary confinement. You mentioned the legislation that has been introduced in the House that's garnering support in the Senate. And I know several people on this call may be asking, how might our faith tradition be a resource for their advocacy and the efforts to end torture, the torture of solitary confinement? What exactly do our faith commitments say about this issue and how we ought to respond? So if anyone would like to speak to that.
Well, in the film, if you watched it or if you haven't and want to watch it afterwards, Claire DeRoche from the Unitarian Church in Shelter Rock has a great piece in there about, you know, first of all, the faith community meets every week. You know, we don't all have a lot, other than where we work, we don't have a lot of places that meet every week where we can actually talk to people and say, hey, here's what's going on, gather a few folks together. They did not. I've presented at that church a number of times. They do not have everybody that sits in the pews on Sunday as part of their coalition. It's a small group. And it's amazing what that group has been able to do to get in the mix, help the activists in New York pass a state bill that will ban solitary confinement with exceptions in the entire state of New York. That group was absolutely instrumental. It's just a small group in their congregation. So I think the base that we have, and we all know the social justice routine in the congregations where, you know, you hear something one week, you hear something another week, but you'll find folks that will start to say, hey, have you heard about this solitary confinement thing? Yeah, I have. And then you go out and you find somebody who's working on it, or you start working on it yourself, because as Keon says in the film, if you've got a jail, it's happening. If you've got a county facility, it's happening. If there's a state prison near you, it's happening. Just go in there and walk right in and say, we want to talk, we want to get this going. I think that's the best of who we are at the faith community. I mean, yes, we've got all the National Episcopal Church and the true rabbis for human rights and others that are doing this work at a larger stage, but it can't happen without the work that's being done at the smaller stage by the faith communities in their own places where they are.
Yeah, I just want to underscore that, you know, the faith community has the consistent convening power that no other space really has, in a type of moral authority where people look to their synagogues, their churches, they're looking to their mosques as spaces where value is created, where they understand what is the value or the value ethics of this community. And so it's critical that we use and leverage our voice and our authority towards this this effort or this challenge that is isolating and confining and separating so many of us from our sisters and brothers. As an ordained clergy person in the Progressive National Baptist Convention, we look to Luke 4:18 as that bedrock of social justice ministry. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news to the poor, to set the captives free. That if we're going to be followers of the religion of Jesus, that we have to take seriously this work of liberating the oppressed and of looking at carceral systems that confine and divide us. I want to lift up a question around the kind of cost that this type of torture imposes on us, a type of moral cost, as it were. Several people that were interviewed in the film talked about this moral cost of allowing the torture of solitary confinement to continue without any type of interruption. How do we think about solitary confinement in the way that it impacts the morality of our collective society?
I can start that off, get us all started. I think, you know, I think that it's really difficult to be so close and up close. I think this is part of the reason correctional officers suffer so much, and they're not living there, but they just work there, that when you come across in contact with so much harm over and over and over again, you really don't walk away unscathed, you know. And then when we allow ourselves just even the slightest opportunity to kind of fall into this space where we're making, I want to say, immoral decisions or advancing more immoral policies or policies that are legal but unethical, you know, we stray so far away from what the norm is that the abnormal becomes comfortable. And I think, like, during the pandemic, for example, we saw so many laws change and so many policies change that it was so normalized that even when the pandemic no longer occurred, they still occur. They were still standing. I mean, there's people, in other words, there's people right now in Massachusetts who have not gotten mail, seen their families since the beginning of the pandemic because some of those policies are still standing. You know, and like, what happens when we give ourselves permission to treat others less than human, and how that impacts us? It's like the cyclical process in a sense, you know? It's something I think about in terms of like how when we allow harm to happen, whether, because inaction is also action. I don't want to get involved with that. Well, you just made an act not to act, right? So therefore, you also are a facilitator and a perpetuator of this harm, whether not directly, you know, but somehow it's so. Yeah, I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what others have to say, honestly. But those are some of the thoughts that come to mind when we allow something small to happen, no matter how immoral. And I think immorality is like that, where it's like water, it will like flow wherever you allow it to, or like it'll like grow into like this, like, you know, kind of impact everything it touches, if you will, you know. And I've seen correctional officers start their jobs early. I did 13 years straight across 9 different prisons in New York, and I've seen correctional officers start their work at 22 years old, and they're like really bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. They're ready to change the world. And I done ran into them 8 years later in another prison, and it's almost like the life was just sucked out of them, you know? So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, you know, I hear the words of Dr. King that we have to be maladjusted to injustice, that we can't allow something to persist just because it's routine and just because it's something we've been adjusted to. We can't allow that to become the norm if it diminishes the humanity and the ability of our brothers and sisters to thrive.
Just another reaction I had to that is that, you know, like, and remember, in fact, I said this during one of the first conference at Ebenezer Church during our inaugural conference, was that we have to be very careful not to become. We have to be very careful not to let the cure become the part of the disease per se, right? So when I started my presentation and I talked about, you know, how like the biggest fallacy that DOC tells itself is that, you know, the more that I punish you, the more this is going to make you change this behavior, not knowing how that punishment exasperates the behavior. So now you treat me worse than maybe I've treated others, and you're so under the guise of accountability, and therefore I get to suspend my morality because now I give myself permission to treat you immorally based on whatever reason I think you're here. Because I've met many correctional officers who said I've never met a Black person before outside of a correctional setting. So now, because I'm holier than thou, and I've given myself permission to hold others accountable, right? I can't suspend the morality of how that happens. So I put another way, like the death penalty. We kill people to teach people not to kill people, yet we hold ourselves morally superior to those that we killed through the death penalty. You know, and I think it's a dangerous emotional and moral and psychological place to be in. Yeah, when we think that we're actually providing the cure, and we're actually just perpetuating the disease, if you will. Thanks for that.
Well, that's so wise. I see that we have 3 minutes. Do we have time for one more question, or how are we with respect to time?
We have probably one more question, and then we'll talk about next steps and the announcements moving forward. It's not just a webinar. You have to know what's going to happen next and how you can plug into our next EMI work or NRCAT's work, things like that, like what's coming up for us at the end of the year, maybe even things to think about in the coming year for this particular group.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, so I just have one more question as it relates to faith communities and creating environments where people can feel safe as they engage this work. So there are several people in the film that demonstrated that they would probably whisper that they may have a family member that was incarcerated, saying, oh, I have a brother who's been incarcerated, or a father who's been incarcerated for some years, as if there's like a level of shame and stigma around that. So what steps can faith communities take in order to create a space where people feel the care and compassion and concern if they have a loved one who is incarcerated?
Well, inside the individual congregation, those are like community dynamics that go back generations, and it's hard for folks, and that's part of what I was trying to say. A lot of our work is to try to make it visible and make visible the voices of those who've been in solitary confinement, so that if somebody does come up and say, hey, my son's in solitary confinement in the church or the mosque or synagogue or whatever, that everybody doesn't just have this horrible reaction. No, a lot of people have been in solitary confinement, and a lot of people are in solitary confinement. This is not a time to have this reaction of horror. This is a time to embrace this person and say, what can I do? What can I do to help you? And at the larger societal level, there are racial dynamics here too. And I think the coalitions in lifting up the voices, I mean, we know that the predominant number of folks in solitary are Latino and African Americans. And so for communities that aren't majority there, those communities need to learn how to step back and let somebody else step forward. And that's actually a big part of our community organizing work that we do, and a big part of what we try to, you know, Johnny and others, when we're out there, we try to pay attention to that, because it is not safe all the time for somebody who's been in solitary confinement to step forward in a predominantly white community and start talking about, hey, I was in prison and this is what happened to me, without and not you know, not wanting to elicit the sympathy response, but actually try to be there as a peer, as a colleague, as somebody who will stand right next to you in the work, if you'll just respect them for who they are, and not just listen to their story and then say, okay, good, now let us go out there and fix it for you. So there's a lot of great, and EMI is like perfectly positioned, I think, as a network to kind of be through that same journey. NRCAT's been on a 10-year journey. It was not easy to work on solitary confinement because we had to do a lot of that inner work ourselves as an organization before we could even step forward and be credible around around a group that could actually say, hey, we might have some ways that we can help change this. That's a lot. I don't know if that's what you were digging for, Devon, but I just wanted to share that part of our ethos too, because it's a really important part of this. Recognizing that is a really important part of how you're going to be successful in this work.
No, yeah, I appreciate that, and I didn't expect you know, one answer that could just solve it all. If that were the case, then a whole lot more of us would be doing this work. But I appreciate the nuance that goes into this work and the kind of intentionality and thoughtfulness that we need to have. Johnny's also shared several ideas in the chat that people can think about and possibly adopt based on the context in which they are they find themselves in. So we want to go to, so first and foremost, just want to appreciate and thank all of our panelists today, Reverend Ron, Johnny, and Nicole, for their witness and for the work that they do throughout the year. I also want to give a shout out to Nicole with the work that she does with the Stations of Hope with respect to creating healing communities and communities where folks can feel compassion and care. She does that work with us across the field here in Georgia. So we want to go to any announcements and any next steps that we can invite folks to. I know we have a Good Trouble Lab that we are cooking up with Multifaith EMI, which will take place in February of 2024. This is, in a real sense, anchored in the tradition and the legacy of Congressman John Lewis, who encouraged all of us to get in some good trouble and necessary trouble. So this convening will be an opportunity for students of social justice to engage in a nonviolent direct action teach-in, where they will learn the principles of advocacy and organizing and connect with organizations across the Metro Atlanta area so that they can support social justice campaigns in real time throughout 2024, especially as we approach the election of 2024. The Good Trouble Lab will take place February 23rd, 2024. You can learn more about that by going to multifaithemi.org and signing up on our newsletter, where we'll have information and updates related to the lab, as well as other initiatives that are coming forward in the upcoming year. And want to yield to my colleagues at NRCAT to share any announcements that you may have regarding the End Mass Incarceration, federal legislation, and other mobilizations that are coming up.
Yeah, go ahead, Ron. I'll add on.
I'll just mention one thing, and Johnny can speak. I don't know that we mentioned that we have a national network of solitary survivors. Michael Saavedra, who's on our staff, who himself spent 15 years in the dungeon of solitary confinement in California, Pelican Bay. He is coordinating the network along with Johnny, and they're doing some amazing work with survivors. If anyone here wants to plug survivors in your community or just want to learn more about it, you should definitely get a hold of Johnny. It's amazing work. It's a powerful work. There's peer support, there's advocacy, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in that space that Johnny and Michael and the rest of so many other people across the country are trying to build a network to really start to move the ball even more than we already have. So I'm going to give it over to you, Johnny.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. I love it when that comes together.
I'm the biggest fan of
Yeah.
that.
The only thing I'll add is that, we do have 20 potentially 22 soon state level campaigns that people can plug into all sorts of advocacy work. And if you live in one of those states, or even if you're not in one of those states, you can still connect to the work. You can check on our website for the state campaigns, but we will be sending up a follow-up communication that has the slides, the resources shared here. Definitely please download the chat if you're able to, but we'll still follow up and share the resources. And yes, if you do know solitary survivors who are in your network, please share the application with them. We're trying to organize, as you can see, solitary survivors across the country. And just looking forward to continuing partnership with EMI and supporting, the vision of EMI within a number of legislative parties, including solitary and others. Thanks.
Thank you all so much. And so, again, we appreciate your presence, your commitment, and the work that we have ahead of us. We're stronger together. And again, in the words of Fannie Lou Hamer, none of us are free unless all of us are free. And I want to posit this message from Rabbi Hillel, who said that the world is equally balanced between good and evil, but your next act can tip the scale. And so with that, I'll leave you with this good word, this benediction. May the peace of God be with you and with you. May the peace of God be with you and with you. May no demonic force enter your household. And may God place a hedge of protection around you and yours. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind always be at your back. May the sunlight of the divine gently grace your cheek. And may rain gently fall upon your fields. May God keep you in the hollow of God's holy hand. Until we meet again, let's get in some good trouble and end this moral scar of solitary confinement. Go in peace.
Amen.